Okay, so we're going to start with Cecelia tonight, and her talk is all about debugging Angular applications. I'm personally very excited for this because it seems like not so much this week, but like for the past 2 weeks before that, I was just doing all testing like all day long. So it's like fresh on my mind. But let me kind of introduce Cecelia a little bit. I introduced her a tiny bit before. But to give you more of a proper introduction, Cecelia she's currently the community lead at replay.io, but she's dedicated to building developer communities that are inclusive, constructive, and that make software development a better experience for everybody. And her role as community lead at Replay, what she's doing there, she's involved with not just the coding and writing, but she gives talks like this and around the community. I think you have like 12 talks lined up that I've seen you talking about on Twitter. So that's awesome.
It'll be a busy summer. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be fun though. She's a teacher, and then most importantly, she likes to just be a listener and hear what she can do to help improve the experience for everybody. And she's also on the side a lead volunteer with Women Who Code, and she's a chapter head for Out in Tech Atlanta, and she's a mentor. And then this one's kind of cool too, because I hadn't really heard about this a whole lot until just, I don't know, seems like it came out a couple years ago that I started hearing about it, but it's the GitHub Stars program. So lots and lots going on there, Cecelia. What I'd love to do though is actually kind of ask you a couple of questions as well, because you're just a fun person to get to know. So one thing I have always really admired about you though is you actually are very musically talented. And I remember you telling us that you had like a band, and I think you were either the singer or you played the guitar or both. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I went to middle school and high school. I went to an art school and I studied music half a day for all of like 6th through 12th grade. And then I started off college as a music major, music business major, because that was the only way my parents would like sign off on it. But I played in bands pretty much throughout like most of my 20s. Primarily a vocalist, but also did keys, accordion, like xylophone, miscellaneous percussion. I can play guitar and ukulele and mandolin, kind of some of those different things. So yeah, now it's like a hobby, kind of like something I still do for fun here and there. But I've actually found a lot of like overlap between musicians and people who work in like programming or in coding.
Right.
And I don't know if it's because it's like it's a language in itself, if it's that kind of mix of like creative and technical, because there's a lot of technique in music theory. And so I feel like everywhere I've gone, I kind of find a lot of people who also are interested in music or have like a musical background. So
that's so true. I've kind of noticed that too. Like Craig Spence is a perfect example of that. Okay.
And
so
I was gonna say, like on the replay team, Brian Vaughn, who joined our team, he was like a React core maintainer, and he developed React Devtools, but he like just released an album. Like he like recorded
cool.
an album, and if you check out his Twitter, it's like his SoundClouds and Spotify links are there. And so I love seeing people like that who are like still like doing it all basically. So
I think it'd be cool if ng-conf like found people like that from the community, and rather than hiring like some random band, if we just had like all of these developers from the Angular community come in and just like take turns playing ng-conf.
I love it. ng-conf so talent show.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if you had a band today, what would you name it?
Ooh, I would probably name it the Bolitas after my dog, because Bolita is my dog's name, and I just like I'm obsessed with her. So, and I feel like the Bolitas would be like a really cool like girl rock band. I've always wanted to be like in an all girl rock band, and I want to like learn drums for it, just because I've never played drums before. But yeah, so that would be my dream, is to have like a all girl rock band called the Bolitas and play drums. So
you like a Travis Barker in the making. Barker? Is it Barker or Parker?
Yeah, Barker. Yeah.
Barker. Okay.
Yeah. Or I've always like when I was like never could really play them because you have to have space and like you have to make a lot of noise and it's like whole kits and so but yeah, so I feel like that's like the one thing I never really did too much with drums. So
drums, nice. Okay, well, I expect to have like a full-on drum performance next time we see each other.
Nice. It's also a good upper body workout,
Oh, there you go. Okay, so something that I know is important to you is teaching and sharing and contributing, right? So what's something that you've found to be particularly effective when you're teaching other people, and especially I think maybe not just like entry level, but juniors, I don't know, I guess just across the board, because we're all learning all the time. So is there just anything that you've ever found to be particularly effective?
Yeah, so one of the things that I like to do is actually ask people how they like to learn. And some people don't know the answer to that question. And so if they don't, then I'll say, do you like how do you tend to read docs? Do you tend to watch videos? Do you like to get your hands dirty? And then we'll try to guide how I talk to them or how I teach them based on that, like whatever the methodology is, what type of learner they are. Because early on, I like to read. I'm a docs reader. I like to read blog posts, and so I would just say like, oh, like there's a doc for that. Here's a link. And then over time I realized that some of the people that I was training, they would still have a lot of questions, or it wasn't really sinking in. And I was like, okay, well, like how do you like to learn? They're like, well, like I usually watch tutorial videos online. And so I was like, okay, maybe I need to make code samples. So maybe I need to record some videos instead or do some pair programming so they can see it in action. So understanding how people like actually can learn and like what their learning style is can go a long way and helping them discover that if they're not sure.
Something I feel like is left out of a lot of tutorials and everything is like people get excited to start teaching and they jump right into it, but they don't start by showing what it is you're trying to build. And so it's kind of like this obscure idea of, I know I'm building something and I understand what you're saying logically, but I can't visualize. So I totally appreciate how you're saying, like, you start off by asking people, what kind of learner are you? And totally effective. But
and to your point, Brooke, like that's a really great something we see a lot, right, is people who are learning JavaScript and they learn it in isolation, right? They learn what a variable is, what a loop is, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, I'm going to make a website, and then it's deployments, it's connecting it to the HTML, like understanding all of the things that go around it and how that fits in context. Is such a leap forward from that. So it's almost helpful to provide the context and then let's dig into the details. So yeah, starting from that big picture, like that end result is really helpful. It's a good one.
Totally. So kind of flip that a little bit then. And instead of talking about other people, I'm going to ask more to you, but in a slightly different way, because like, what do you do to help yourself grow like professionally? What are some things that you do that you feel like really help you to level up your skills or just kind of take your career up and up and up?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I should be like admitting this too much on like a recorded talk, but one of the founders women who code Atlanta, Angel Banks, who's like the one who got me into speaking, and she's like was one of my early mentors around like giving me the confidence to speak. She like told me this phrase around like conference driven development, where essentially like you submit a talk, like, or you like have an idea, you kind of pitch it, and then like maybe it's 3 or 4 months out, and then as you get closer, then you really like are working on that goal and learning that topic and really refining it. So that's something that I like to do, is I like to kind of see what gaps are out there in terms of like content. And even if it's something that I don't necessarily feel like I'm a total expert in this and I have years of experience in this, but just if it doesn't exist, like seeing if there's an interest in it, and if there is, then challenging myself to like go through the steps, build it, like learn talk to people who have the same problems, and kind of build that out from there. And that's something that I did with like GitHub content, and then Cypress content, and Angular, like NGRX stuff. And that's like it's kind of a way to force yourself to be a little bit uncomfortable, because like if you're comfortable, then you're not growing. And so that's kind of a way to to kind of put some stakes on the table in how you're going to learn things too.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. So one of the first things I learned was get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't want to take any more time away from your talk. I know you've put in lots of time and prep, so I'll turn the time over to you. When you're done though, go and check out the chat because it's fun to see what questions people were posting in there for you. So
awesome. I'm hoping that I can, sorry, I'll be able to check on the chat as I go through.
Okay.
Because I have 2 screens, so I'm going to try and make it work.
Nice. Okay. I will say though, if anybody has a question about Cecelia's presentation while she's going, one of the most helpful things you can do is actually put your question in the Q&A so that when she's done, then we can go back and answer those questions. But that's not to say I'm discouraging from using the chat as well. So just everywhere, put your questions everywhere. All right, Cecelia, it's all yours.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so let's see if this works right. You should see some slides that say debugging Angular apps. Awesome.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, cool. So so these slides are public. I will share the link out after the presentation, just that way, we can kind of we're following along together as we're going through, but I will share them out. There's not too much on the slides, but all the links are there. So I will kind of be talking as we go through a lot. So Brooke already kind of gave me a really, really awesome introduction. GitHub Stars program, it was started last year. So this is just the 2nd year of it. And I was really, really fortunate to be part of that initial cohort. Out in Techland chapter head, we just started in-person events again last month. Women Who Code, Front End, Volunteer. And unofficial Cypress ambassador, they have like a real Cypress ambassador program. But before I started at Replay in January, I was at Cypress for 2 years and really love the community, really love the framework, still answer a lot of Cypress questions. So that's me. I kind of got a chance to meet me already. And so I want to start by just kind of like getting a sense, like you can use a hand raise, you can pop in chat, but who here has debugged an issue this week? Let's see. Pull the chat up. Okay, yeah, seeing some hands go up. Okay. All right. Yeah, seeing some things in chat for sure. All right, awesome. Okay, so keep the hands up if you've debugged today. If today at work you debugged an issue. All right, so yeah, so still seeing some hands up. So it's not too surprising. Developers actually spend up to half their time debugging and maintaining software. We talk a lot about how developers these days are more like mechanics, kind of, keeping the engine running versus architects building out, and being able to build out new features. A lot of time is spent on debugging and maintaining software. And so that's something that it seems like, so y'all have experienced, and, a lot of developers kind of go through that experience. One more question here, and you can pop it in the chat or you can raise your hand, but who here has a defined process for how they debug? If you have a bug, you know where to start, you know what you're going to do when you come across a bug. Okay, good. Seeing some hands. All right, I like that. Some hands. Okay. So that's great if you do. Finding a good process that works for you is really important. But when I talk to a lot of developers, a lot of them don't have a defined process for debugging. It's a lot of kind of, like console logs, or kind of just rooting around the code, hoping for the best, reading through the stack traces. So if this feels like you, when you're debugging, just hoping for the best, trying out different things. I'm here to tell you that the right process, tools, and also getting experience can make debugging better. I tend to like to work in areas of software development that other people find very difficult. So testing, debugging, writing documentation, the things that like developers don't want to spend time on. That's where I find that those things super interesting. And I think that's one some of the areas that we can make development like a lot better. And so today I want to talk to you about process tools and how you can gain experience in debugging so that you can have a better overall debugging process, and then specifically around Angular applications as well. So let's talk about process. This is the process that I follow. When I started working at Replay, one of the first things I did was talk to, so Replay, if you're not familiar with it, is a debugging tool. It's a debugging platform. It allows you to record a bug, and then you have a replayable, reducible example of that bug with DevTools built in, so you can debug inside of the recording. But one of the first things I did was talk to a lot of our users about their debugging process and getting a sense of how they debugged, how they use different tools. And I found that a lot of people have different processes. Things that I reach for are not the same that others reach for, just like how we all learn differently, how we may all build applications a little bit differently. We also tend to debug differently. So this is the process that I follow. And if you don't have a process, it can be good to start here and then iterate on it and find one that works well for you. So the process that I follow is a combination of 3 questions: what, why, and how. I used to be a journalist in my first life, so I love these like who, what, when, where, why type questions. But for what, it's what is the problem? So what is the problem that we are trying to solve? Why is it broken? And how did this happen? In terms of how can we prevent this from happening again in the future? So to break these steps down, what is the problem? In order to understand what the bug is, the very first thing that you need is a reproducible example. So a lot of times as developers, you're probably experiencing bugs from a couple of different sources. One may be you're working on an issue, like you're building out a new feature, you hit a bug during the development process, and you're trying to figure out why that's happening. That's pretty straightforward because you already have the application running locally. You probably just created the bug and now you're trying to fix it. So a reproducible example may not be as critical or may not be as difficult of a challenge in that case. Other times you're fixing bugs that were reported by users or were reported from other team members or were reported by QA doing manual validation, or you're fixing a bug that happened in an automated test in CI. In those cases, reproducing the bug with the same environment, the same code, everything that happened at the time the bug occurred is the first step to ensure that you understand what the actual problem is. Next is knowing what the expected behavior is. So this requires knowledge of the product and the code base. So before you can know what's wrong, you have to know what right looks like. And then you can compare and contrast where the bug diverges from the expected behavior. So if you're not solid with the functionality of the area of the app that you're debugging, like finding a working example, like where else in the code base do we have a similar implementation where it's not broken? Or was there a previous version of this code base where this worked? Is there another similar project that I can look at to see a working example of the functionality that I'm trying to implement? Or I'm using I'm using NGRX for the first time and things are breaking. Can I see an example of expected behavior? So again, understanding what working looks like is important for being able to define what the problem actually is. And then that last step is having a defined problem. If you know something's not working, but you can't really put your finger on it, or you don't have it tightly scoped, it's going to be a lot harder to isolate the issue and debug it. You probably have seen, if you've ever worked with open source projects or you filed the GitHub issue that has issue templates, they'll say, expected behavior, actual behavior, and whenever you're reporting a bug. And that is so you have a very specific problem statement. So for example, when I click on the add to cart button, the I expect it to add to cart. Instead, it does not, right? So you have, okay, so now you know something around the add to cart functionality is broken. You have like, you've been able to define what that problem is. And then you can start to refer to other examples of like, okay, where does the add to cart button work? How can I compare that? And then that lets you get to the next step, which is, why is it broken? This is like, obviously, it may feel kind of like the draw the rest of the owl. If you've ever seen that meme, you know, starting like, okay, like you get started, now just figure out why it's broken, right? So there is some process that you can go through inside here. First thing I like to think about is let yourself have multiple hypotheses. So what happens is sometimes we think we know what the problem is, and we chase that down a rabbit hole, and we end up wasting a lot of time. Studies have found, I don't have a link to it, but that if you have up to 3 hypotheses versus 1, you are actually more likely to get to resolution faster. So, you know, have some hypotheses, but don't expect that you actually know what the root cause is right off the bat. One thing that you can do here is to collaborate early. Take advantage of other people's experience. And if you do start to chase down a couple hypotheses and you're hitting dead ends, you know, share that example with somebody else in the team. Ask questions, especially if somebody else has more familiarity with that part of the code base. Say, hey, I tried this and I tried this. What else could be going on? Get some additional hypotheses that you can then test out. Then you want to isolate the issue. So there's this like, you know, the phone book sort method kind of algorithm, right? Where if you have to find a name in the phone book, you could start by going through page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, but that's not the most efficient way to do it. You want to essentially strip out the code that you know works and get to as close as possible the point of isolation. There is a lot of things that happen in my add to cart example, right? So I click on the button, there's an event handler. That event handler may have a function call. That function call then may dispatch an action to my store. That store, when it updates state, may then fire off an API call. That API call may hit my backend. It may even hit a third-party API. Then I wait for the response. I have to handle that response correctly. Then I have to pass the response data back to my front end. Then I have to render the cart on the front end. There are so many steps that happen just from that one isolated issue. And being able to rule out or like rip off like chunks of that phone book and say, okay, this is not the issue. This is not the issue. This code didn't run. This part worked. This part worked. You're going to be able to isolate as closely as possible and have a good starting point. So again, isolating the issue as closely as possible and then tracing the root cause from there. So if you're lucky, you have an error and you can trace the call stack and see what, you know, the execution of that call stack and trace it back. A lot of times we don't. Like silent errors are very, very common, especially with modern frameworks, especially if something is happening within the framework. If we've fought against the framework and are like writing any kind of custom logic, sometimes we don't really have good error handling. And so in that case, tracing the root cause typically involves tracing through the functionality of the code. So we'll talk a little bit about like Debugger later, which allows you, and breakpoints, which allows you to pause and, you know, at execution to be able to see, okay, it was working here. You may have like console logs in your code that said this works up to here, works up to there, works up to here. Something when you're dealing with async code or race conditions specifically, if your console logs output in an order that you don't expect, typically you're dealing with an async JavaScript issue. So if you say like console log this works, console log like this works number 2, and 2 runs before 1, chances are you're dealing with something async that's being handled improperly. That tip actually came from a talk I saw recently at Reactathon about debugging async code, and I thought it was just like the greatest thing. So you'll want to trace it down to the actual root cause. And the thing here too is to remember not to treat symptoms, but to treat the disease. So, you may get to a certain point where you're just like, oh, hey, like, we need to handle the response better, or like, if we bail out, like, let's just throw a message. But if you can actually trace it all the way down to the root cause, then you are more likely to prevent future bugs in that area and be able to better understand how you can prevent issues like that in the future. Which takes me to the next step, which is, how did this happen? So you've traced the bug, you've isolated the issue, you've traced it down to the root cause, you see what happened. And so bugs happen to everybody. There's no shame in it. I think like debugging is kind of one of those things that we like tend to do on our own. We don't ask for help and we just kind of like struggle through it. But really, like, everybody has bugs. Like it literally happens to everybody. And so understanding how bugs happen is really important for preventing them in the future, and for also better understanding why bugs happen. So when you see similar bugs in the future, you'll recognize those patterns. So one of the things I like to ask is, could a test have caught this? And that, is me wearing my little testing hat. But if you have a bug in production, asking, is this something that we could have tested for? Do we need to review our test cases? Is this an edge case? Is it a critical user flow? Adding to cart, pretty important. That should probably work. And so if it doesn't, reviewing if you need to make some changes to your test suite or implement testing. Another thing to ask is, are we using the framework correctly? So a lot of times bugs stem from just fighting against the framework, or not leveraging the framework the way that it should be leveraged, or mixing different features of a framework. So I'm not going to lie, I've been working a lot in React lately. Replay's front end is React, and so is Cypress's front end. And so it's really, really easy to misuse React. I see a lot of React bugs. That's something that we work with especially well with at Replay. But the same thing applies to Angular as well. Are you leveraging the functionality of the framework the same way that you should be? And if not, how can you make better decisions as a developer and as a team to make sure that you're using the framework correctly? And also, are there other areas of the code base with the same implementation? So this is helpful when you're diagnosing, if you can say, oh, hey, like, we have this same add to cart functionality in our sister store, or like our other front end, and it works there. But it can also be helpful if you identify a bug and you say, hey, like, we're using this functionality in a lot of different places, and it could be buggy there too. Or we're using, a specific like lifecycle hook in order to manage some of our async data calls, and we're using that across the code base. In this one specific instance, we had a race condition, and it was resulting in old state showing up on the DOM. Maybe that's happening elsewhere. So that can be an indicator, again, of how did this specific bug happen? And could there be other places in the code base where it could happen as well? So again, and the important thing is that you find a process that works for you. There's a lot of processes out there, but if you are able to use the scientific method, really that's what this is, right? It's the scientific method. Or if you have a different version of it, being able to have a strategic approach to how you solve bugs is really important. Once you have your approach in place and you know how to attack those problems, you want to make sure you have the right tools to attack those problems. So we're going to talk first about Angular Devtools. So Angular Devtools, I have the link here on the slides to the guide here, is, it's essentially it's built into the browser. So when you have your site built up locally, or whether it's like in a certain environment, you are able to inspect your site and use Angular Devtools to debug it. And so this is just kind of like a demo app. I actually used this app way back when I spoke at IoniConf about testing NGRX actions and effects with Cypress. So it's a very old version of Angular. It's from 2 years ago. But I wanted to pull it up because it also uses NGRX, which I can show, which I'm going to dig into in just a minute. But essentially, once you enable and install Angular Devtools and you open any application that's using Angular, you're going to see this Angular tab here, and that's going to open your Angular Devtools. So Angular Devtools, oh, let's see. I just have to refresh it. There, let's see, Angular Devtools. There it goes. Okay, fun. So yeah, so this is like a really favorite shows, unfavorite. You can remove things and it'll delete it completely. Application. So we have some components in here, and so you can see Angular version 9. And Angular Devtools essentially gives you a suite of tools in order to be able to inspect your components and your application. So you may already be familiar with like the element picker in Chrome DevTools or in Firefox DevTools, which will show your application like HTML tree, CSS rules. You have your sources tab, which will show you your code that is actually being captured in the browser. If you don't necessarily want to have to go back and forth between your code editor and the browser itself. But Angular DevTools gives you additional information by allowing you to view your components and your component tree. And I'm not quite sure why it's not loading. It just was. Okay, there it goes. So under the Components tab, there's two tabs, Components and Profiler. The Components tab shows you your component tree. And you can click on to any component tree, and you're able to see your inputs, your outputs, and the properties within those. So for example, if I go into this button, I can see all my properties here. If I go into my app shows components, I can see my inputs, which is my shows array. I can inspect those. And I can also see my outputs, which are essentially the events that I'm emitting, the favorite, remove, and unfavorite. What you can do here is you can also, there's an element picker inside the components DevTools as well. So I can come in here and I can say like, what is this component? And it'll take me there. I can see that it has some like router link in it. I can inspect what those routes are. I can see what the properties are here as well. One thing to keep in mind is that properties are also editable. So if I go to this button here and I can see that color is born, I can change it to, I think, danger. No, I may not know off the top of my head what the different property is. Let's just look at disabled. So I can change disabled to true, and I can see what it would look like with that property value. So if I want to validate that behavior or get a sense of what that would look like on the DOM, if I am saying if the button is disabled and it shouldn't be, I can kind of like play around with some of those properties as well. The thing to keep in mind is that this is always going to be your current state. So if I am on this component, or this page, it's going to be my app favorite shows component. If I am on this page, it's going to re-render and it's going to be this component tree instead. So it's going to be page specific, and it's also going to be point in time specific. There is also the profiler, which allows you to record your application in order to see how your components are rendering, how they're detecting changes. This is really helpful if you're specifically debugging any kind of like lifestyle hooks, or if you have state that's updating but changes aren't being detected, being able to understand what's happening in your application as it's running. So that is a comparison against, again, this kind of static view where you're inspecting it at like as it is right now. One other thing that I wanted to show is that with Angular DevTools, whatever component that you have selected, you can also go to the console and you can kind of like pull up the event itself. The component instant itself. So in the console, you can type $ng0 or to get the current component instance, or ng1 to get the previously selected one. But for any component, this will also output the information to the console. So if you want to kind of dig into that entire component instance as well, that's another option that you have there too. So it's Angular Devtools. It's, you install it in your browser and you're able to use it from there. And there's the link to the guide with some additional information, especially some more details around how to use the profiler. I won't go too much into that. That's good for debugging, though, if you're having like performance issues, state not updating, lifecycle hooks, understanding if components are rendering too many times, things of that nature. All right. And then next is Redux Devtools. And I know, so you're probably thinking, Redux, what? This isn't React, but Redux Devtools also works with NGRX and also works with like MobX and Jotai and a couple of other ones. But NGRX also talks to Redux Devtools so you can leverage it with Angular applications. So if you're using NGRX with this, which this app is, you can also install Redux, and you can see here all the dispatched actions that take place in your application. So the nice thing about this is that it will store them for your session. So it's not necessarily just a point in time. You're able to like see the entire kind of tree as it goes through. So my first one here is I was get all shows success. So that was the type shows API, get all shows. You're able to see what the tree was that took place. And you can also see the state at that point in time. So if I go ahead and dispatch an action, go ahead and favorite that show. We saw this action here, favorite show. I can see my action here. Type was favorite show. The show ID from the property I'm passing here is 1. And I can see my state after. I still have the 4 shows, but I can see here my diff. So my show state becomes from is favorite goes from false to true for that 0 index array of my show, or my 0 index of my shows array. So yeah, so I'm able to kind of see all those actions. I unfavorited my show. I favorited it, I unfavorited it from here, and I'm able to inspect any of those as they're taking place. So this is really helpful if you want to validate that you're passing the correct properties, if actions are of the correct type. If you have an event that dispatches multiple actions, or you have side effects that are taking place, ensuring that the correct effects are following the action. So in this case, you probably see like we have this success that follows the action. So, understanding that those should go in tandem, ensuring that they do. Those are things that you can use Redux tool for. I personally, I love the diff. I think diff is really helpful for understanding what changed for a specific dispatch. That can, especially since, with a reducer, sometimes multiple things can change at one time, and being able to see what specific state changes took place from that one dispatch is really, really helpful. You do also have a log. This is the inspector view. You also do have log monitor, which will again, kind of keep a log of everything that took place in a different view. You have a chart view, which will show your state. So if you have more complex state than this is just 4 shows. This is actually a tree view of your state. And then there's also RTK query. That's actually something used for Redux toolkits. That won't really apply here. But the same thing goes too, in that, you can kind of go in here and you can test things out as well. So this is essentially a little test block that shows up, and you can edit this test and you can kind of play around with it. So if you are trying to decide if a solution is going to work or not, you can use Redux Devtools right in the browser. So yeah, that is another tool that I recommend checking out and leveraging. There's a lot of good documentation. This is the Redux Devtools repository. So that will show you how to leverage all those different functionalities and some examples as well. And then last but not least, I'm trying to keep an eye on time, Replay. So I mentioned that I am the community lead at Replay. Replay is an open source, it's free for individuals debugging tool that lets you record a bug and create a debuggable reproduction of that. So I will say it is Angular Devtools is not built into Replay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. We have React Devtools, which looks a lot like Angular Devtools, but we don't have it specifically for Angular itself. But I will say that because we have implemented a Redux Devtools functionality, that here we go. This is the right one. That you can use, you can debug NGRX with it. So Redux Devtools, we've added that like 2 weeks ago. It's brand new, experimental. But essentially, this is a replay. So I made a recording of me in my site, clicking on a couple of things. What happens is Replay records the entire browser session, including all the events, network requests, and then all the code that executed in the browser. And it creates this debuggable recording. So if I hop over to DevTools, this is going to look very similar to what we kind of just saw in the browser, right? I have all my sources, my code that ran. I can see how many times each function executed during the course of the recording. I have my network calls. I have my element picker the same way that you do in Chrome DevTools. And maybe I need to enable it. I do. And I have Redux Devtools as well. It's like I said, it's experimental, so you have to enable it. But this allows you, I can come in here and I can see my dispatches and I can see like where things happen at certain points in time. So I can connect that to the DOM as well. One of the other things is that because we record all the code that executed, you can see how many times each line hit. So here in my favorite shows component, I can see that I dispatched this kind of favorite shows action in this recording one time. And I can even kind of log information to the console. So I can add console logs retroactively. And I can see, okay, so when this function executed, when this dispatch, the show ID was 1, and I can fast forward to that point in time and see what was happening in the DOM, and add, and I can kind of log information to the console after the fact without having to like change my source code or reload it. So this we kind of is, I talked about collaboration, you can share these, the link to this is in the slides as well. If you want to play around with it, it's like a public recording that you can go in and debug. One of the things that I like to do is if I'm recording, like if I'm working with a new site, is come in here, play around, like see what hits, see what doesn't. We'll be taking a look at a couple more bugs in just a minute. But again, caveat, not totally optimized for Angular yet. We would love to make that better. But so just kind of keep that in mind as if you do end up using it. So I mentioned experience, right? Getting experience with debugging is something that can really help you get better with it. So Jen Creighton, AKA Girl Code on Twitter, did a talk recently at Reactathon. I mentioned it earlier. She said the best debugging tool is knowing something well. Sometimes you don't know something until you know it. And that's something where it just takes experience, it just takes exposure. And one of the ways to get better at that is, looking at bugs, is not being afraid to debug and helping other people solve their bugs. If you have somebody on your team that has bugs, the more times that you see bugs, the more patterns you'll be able to identify. And so some of the patterns that we see with Angular specifically, some common sources of Angular bugs are fighting against the framework. So, mutating the DOM directly, using implementations from other frameworks that don't belong in Angular, just like not using it, like I mentioned earlier, not using it the way that it's supposed to be leveraged. Those are things that can lead to bugs. If you are doing anything that's like customized that the docs don't recommend, that can definitely be a source of bugs. Another is lifecycle hooks. This is definitely a big one. I linked to this doc. If you can become really, really familiar with the hook method, the purpose, and then the timings, this documentation really goes into like what the specific use cases are for each of these hook methods. And you want to not fight the framework, you want to stick within those guidelines because especially when you're using lifecycle hooks to manage change detection, state updates or any kind of async code, that can definitely be a really common source of issues. Race conditions. I saw somebody in the chat earlier mention race conditions. And yeah, these are a doozy. Whenever you see like old state on the DOM, that's like a typical sign of a race condition. Whenever you see something update, but then update again after you've clicked it, like, that's typically a race condition. Whenever you have conditions that are like, if you have checks for like is off, like is logged in, like is authorized, and it's constantly kicking you out even though you've logged in, like that can be a race condition. Anytime that you're working with third-party APIs, right? Like those can cause race conditions. So definitely a really common source there. Having multiple sources of truth. If you are using store for state management, but then if you're also managing any kind of state at the component level, if you are dispatching, you're making changes to state to the same property from multiple places and those aren't combined. If you have like anything that's any logic that's resulting in a state change that happens in one component but not another, anytime you have multiple sources of truth for a given piece of state, that is definitely a source of bugs. The first bug that I fixed at Replay when I joined was one of those. It was a React bug, but it was could very easily happen in Angular, where we were changing state in the component and then dispatching an action after the fact. But that state change that was happening in the component should have happened elsewhere, and it really needed to be tied to the dispatch. And so we ended up moving it from the component to the reducer instead, so that everything happened together all of the time, single source of truth. Event handling, absolutely. This is one that can cause a lot of issues. I'm going to give an example of that in just a minute here. And then syntax, we've all been there, we had a typo. We used like the wrong like camel casing. We just like used the wrong bracket type, or we did string interpolation when we should have done something else. And so whenever you feel like this should be working, I 100% know that it's right, then we just like double check the docs for the syntax, because we've all been there. So let's take a look at some bugs. Okay, over time, fixing these bugs will become second nature. Practice is important. So let's take a look at some bugs. The first one I want to take a look at, I'm going to leave the link here in correct price format, but actually I'm going to just focus on one given the time, and that is subscribe to updates not working. So this is the kind of Angular demo app. And here, I'm just going to play it. So add to cart. There's actually a pop-up that is not showing, that's a prompt, and then subscribe to price alerts, nothing is happening. And I've added some comments here. The comments are linked directly to specific lines of code. So I can, on this part, this is just kind of linked to the DOM here, and I'm saying clicking subscribe to price alerts does nothing. So the way that I kind of started to get at this was understanding, trying to isolate the issue. So I, really kind of started with my element picker. I came to this button, and the nice thing, even though we don't have Angular Devtools, I can see that it's app product alerts is the component that I'm in, because Angular is really great about how it renders to the DOM, and it makes it helpful for me to be able to see those component names. So I came here and I found my kind of app product alerts component here. And taking a look at here, I made my button click. I'm notifying, I'm doing notified.emit. So I'm emitting an event that's supposed to subscribe to something. I do see that I'm kind of hitting this when it loads. And so I actually searched for that notify.emit. And this is where it's defined, but then it's also happening here inside of my Angular code and handling that kind of click event. And so what I wanted to do here was actually log my event, so I can see what I'm doing, what I'm working with here. And so I went ahead and I logged that to the console, and I can see that, my target is here. I can see, subscribe to price alerts. Okay, so the click is being handled. The event is being emitted. So, what's the next step up? How can I trace this up? And the next thing I found, okay, so where am I kind of calling this here? So this is my on notify is hitting here twice. And then inside of my kind of product list components, my product alert component, I'm saying click notify me. And then in my component here, I have on notify. And I have defined in the HTML here, my product alert. And so on notify, I can see has 0 hits. So this function is never actually being called. So this is where I'm calling my app product alerts. Can anybody tell me what's happening here? I'm curious. I know it's like probably tough to tell, but again, we're notify.emit. Here, I'm saying my output is notify, which is a new event emitter. Here, I'm using my app product alerts component. And here in my app, my product list component, I have an on notify method that's supposed to alert to the window. And yep, yeah, so there's no event handler. We're not listening to the event, right? So typically what you'd want to do is you'd want to actually here is pass through that notify, right? So you need to have your event handler for that notify event that's being emitted, and then actually call my on notify function. So awesome job, Craig. Like you got it, right? So so I could just like add a comment here and be like, we're not handling the notify event here. So yeah, so that's an example of Angular specific bug. We talked about a couple of different things, right? Like event handlers. That was definitely something that could happen there. The other bug that I have in the slides is a syntax specific bug. So there's like some comments in there, but I didn't solve it yet. So if you want to like go in and add comments and see if you can figure it out yourself, that's a good way to get some practice. You can also always share your own bugs with us. We love to see bug examples. So if you have any and you want to work with us, like our Discord is open. You can come chat with me, other members of the team. We can do some debugging together. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and I will I'll post the link to the slides in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Cecelia. One of the first things I can ever remember learning, like when I first got into programming, was a couple of the people who I look to as like my mentors and just kind of my professional heroes. They would talk about how when they focused on and like really mastered testing, they felt like that was when their careers really took off. So I don't know, have you kind of felt like that? Like just how, do you feel like testing gave you a better understanding of being a developer in general, or do you feel like it was kind of the other way around?
Totally. So I was a developer first, actually an Angular developer was my first kind of position. And then when I went to Cyprus, I had never really tested before. We didn't do testing at the place I worked before. And it helped me to understand how the application was supposed to work, because I could look at the test code, I could see the test cases, I can be like, okay, this is what we're expecting to happen. I can read through the test cases and the test code and get that really clear picture of the application functionality, which you don't get from just reading the code itself. Like the code is this like the blueprint, the tests are how you act, is like the house, right? It's like what the house actually looks like once it's been built. And so, yeah, for me, testing kind of opened up a whole new mental model that helped me to be able to like pick up code and learn it more quickly.
Nice, cool. Okay, well, we've got 6 questions here in the Q&A, so let's get through those. A couple of them I might skip over, but only because they're just so similar, but let's see what we get to. All right, so Craig says, is it possible to use the Angular Devtools extension from the Chrome debugger launched from VS Code?
I believe so. I haven't personally like done that myself. I like to use it in Chrome. I'm just like a browser debugger person, but I know a lot of people who like to debug right from within VS Code, and you should be able to just essentially like click the button and it opens up, from there.
Cool. Okay, and then Marcus is wondering, how do we handle views that are frequently updating in Angular DevTools?
Yeah, so with Angular DevTools, really like you may want to record in the profiler to get a sense of like how often those views are updating, how often those components are refreshing, and what is causing the change detection. It's actually a checkbox that you can select when you're in flame graph mode that will only show when change detection occurs. So you can compare that versus the total view and see like, okay, is it reloading when it doesn't detect a change? And like, why is that happening? Sometimes it can be tough though, because like you are locked in a point in time. So if you can use something to record and like be able to step through, or if you're able to like use a debugger, which allows you to pause execution and step through, that can be helpful as well.
Cool. Okay, and then he says, a related question, but regarding Redux Devtools. I really like Redux Devtools, but I found that my DevTools gets cluttered in the real-time apps I build. I try to keep good action hygiene, but I found myself rarely using it because I find it difficult to use. Do you have any recommendations on how to use NGRX DevTools in apps that dispatch actions quite frequently?
So yeah, that can be tough, like being able to zero in and like, because like sometimes you'll like load a page and you'll see like 50 actions just like take off, right? And so kind of being able to maybe if you use like the state tree, honestly, like once replay gets better, right now it's very similar to how Redux DevTools works in the browser, but the plan is essentially allow you to pause at a point in time and then only show dispatches up to that point in time, and then be able to click back and forward. You can also jump and skip within that Redux DevTools like UI. So if you do see a specific like action and you're able to kind of stop, like jump to that point and then kind of trace it from there. If you do have any Redux specific questions though, Mark Erickson, who was the Redux core maintainer, he just joined the replay team and he's like on Twitter at acemark with an E at the end of it. I'll pop that in the chat. He's also in our Discord and he like loves teaching and answering Redux questions. So he probably would have some good insight as well. And again, he like will literally just like talk to anybody. He's super excited about teaching and stuff. So, but yeah, I would say like I feel your pain is what I'm trying to say. And we're hoping to make that better. But right now you can probably use some of that jump and skip functionality.
Nice. Cool. All right. And then Reynald is wondering, does replay allow you to set permissions on who can see these bug reports, or can anyone with the link always see them?
Yeah, so I made those links public specifically, but yeah, typically they're private by default, or you can like share them with just the team if you have a team set up.
Nice. Okay, and then last question. Stephen asks, is the replay session stored in the local browser or on a replay server?
Yeah, so the recording itself is actually, it's stored on, like it's, for most people it's stored in a replay server. If you have like, we have like enterprise features that lets you like use your own like S3 buckets and stuff, but it's actually like, it's kind of interesting. It's not a recording, it's enough of the information in the recording, and then we're literally like replaying it. So we're repainting the DOM, like we're like simulating the re-execution of the code. So everything is continually talking to our back end in order to render that front end. So when you add a console log, we're like literally evaluating that in the back end and sending it to the front. So everything is kind of happening back and forth on the replay servers.
Okay, so Cecelia, I'm just going to tell everybody to follow you because you're just like this fountain of information. I know, like I said before, you're giving at least like 6 or so talks over the summer. So do you want to tell everybody where they can find you and maybe a couple of the conferences where they could try to catch you as well?
Yeah, so, I'm at Cecelia Creates on Twitter and GitHub. And I will be at ViewConf, RenderATL, Refactor.tech, Strange Loop, which is I'm really excited about that one in particular. And I'm also going to be like looking to do some more online virtual events as well, just to kind of, so actually if you have any like need to any, like I love teaching, especially around debugging. Definitely will be doing some more for Women Who Code this summer as well. Some more Women Who Code events too. So yeah. And I also wanted to give like one more quick shout out. Like Replay does have free plans for OSS accounts. So if you have open source like projects, like let us know, like we can get you set up. You can upload your source maps and you can make things private or public as however you need. So like that's one of the things that I do a lot is work with our open source teams and communities. And so happy to support and help however I can there. So
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. Definitely loved that whole talk. So Michael, let's get on to your presentation. I'm going to quickly share my screen just for a quick second so we can show your slide and kind of do an introduction for you. So Michael is going to be talking about hosted, not served. I am just as eager about this one. Yeah. Anytime Michael shares anything, you walk away just feeling like you've learned a ton of information. So already looking forward to it. But to let you know a little bit more about who Michael is, he's an international keynote speaker and currently the CEO of Andromeda Galactic Solutions and also the president of FlexPark. And he's been a leader in the tech industry for is it almost 30 years or over 30 years, Michael?
Almost. I'm not quite that old.
Okay. Almost 30 years, but he's worked alongside like more than 100 companies just to build human-centered solutions. And that's something I know that's really important to him. He has given many wonderful presentations just on accessibility alone. So that one thing alone, it's just something that Michael does everywhere he goes. He makes great user experiences, always focuses on the person. And he's also a Google developer expert. He's a Microsoft MVP. And then he's also authored several books, including Programming Languages, ABC++, Approachable Accessibility, and Architecting CSS. That's a mouthful, that word. But I want to ask you some questions because you're always fun to hear your answers. So I think most importantly, I have to know, what is the best flavor of jelly bean?
The best flavor of jelly bean?
Yes.
Probably, man, I haven't had jelly beans in a long time, but I generally have to go with something like watermelon or green apple or anything that's green. Like green's the best flavor. I don't care which green flavor, right?
The pear.
Sure, that works. That's a good one.
Cecelia, what's your answer to that?
granola bar, which I'm eating right now. No, buttered popcorn. Buttered popcorn.
Ooh, that was a good one. You're not wrong.
It wasn't my favorite.
Nice.
I have some green fans in the chat.
That's right. The pear ones were good. And then I also like just plain old licorice. A lot of people don't like licorice, but licorice is good. All right. Who has been a really big positive influence on you professionally? Do you have like a hero, like a professional hero or someone you really look up to, and why is that person someone you look up to?
Sure. There's a lot of people that I look up to, and a lot of people that have helped me along the way in my journey. And one of the things that's really interesting about that is I went through a lot of my career without really having any mentors or role models. And it wasn't until I got really involved in the community through conferences and meetups and that sort of thing that I started to actually have an answer to this question. And I say that to encourage everyone to stay involved and get more involved, take everyone up on their opportunities to help you get into speaking and interacting with the community more, because it's super valuable. So that said, I've got to pull out a couple people who actually run conferences here in the Midwest, and one of those is Chad Green, who runs Codepalooza down in Louisville. Chad was the very first person who selected me to speak at a conference, and This story is funny because of what we were talking about earlier, but I had gone down there, and I actually went down there because of Alex Papadumos, who ended up publishing my children's book, ABC++, and it runs the daily WTF website, failed blog for programmers. So he was announcing that he was going to be going to this conference, Codepalooza. So I went, year number 2. And had a great time. It was fantastic. I'm like, this is really fun. And I think that maybe this is something I can do. So I went to Chad and I'm like, what would be a really good topic, right, that you don't get a lot of submissions on? And he's like, well, we don't get a lot of Java and we don't get a lot of testing. I'm like, perfect. What do? I submit a talk about testing in Java. And I got selected. and the rest is history. But that was a huge opportunity for me to really get involved and start doing stuff. And so he's been just really instrumental in helping my career take the direction that it has. And so I'm really, really grateful to him for that.
Do you have advice for, because I would agree with that. I think having a mentor or two, there's always that person that kind of makes a difference, that it just takes one. And from there, things just kind of go up and up. But do you have advice for people for how they can reach out to a mentor and really find that person who can be that catalyst for them?
It can be really hard. I think that ask questions and engage with people, and whether that's at a meetup or at a conference or on Twitter or TikTok or wherever you are, where people are producing content for developers, and take the time to ask questions and to engage with them more than just a like or a thumbs up or just an attend at a conference. Welcome and ask them, ask questions, engage. And what you're going to find is that a lot of times the people that are producing the content and are engaging with the community would be more than happy to work with you in some way. And a lot of us, though, are just as uncomfortable reaching out to you as you are to reach out to us. And there are a lot of people that are doing public speaking and are speaking at conferences and doing all these things, keynotes, whatever, that still are shy, they have a hard time with that direct interaction or getting the conversation started, right? And so the more you can overcome the hurdle, the easier it is to get that help. And I find that generally the hardest part of finding somebody to mentor or support you is finding somebody that's in a position to do that, but really it's about engaging them in the first place. And you don't have to start with, will you be my mentor? You start by engaging and interacting with them. First thing you got to know is this somebody that I can look up to, or somebody that is going to be a good fit for working with me? And not everybody will be, and that's fine. I think step one is building the relationship, and then step two is, can you help me, right? Going the next step and asking for support in some way.
I think too, along the lines of what you were saying, like get involved in the community, because I know for me, getting involved and taking opportunities to volunteer, to contribute, that was how I met people, and I met more people and then more people. And then as I was engaging with them, working with them through our conversations, they volunteered that I would love to mentor you. I would love to work with you. So it was just sort of a natural result of contributing and
Yes.
giving back to the community. So great advice. So
the other thing to remember is that everybody has things to learn and things to offer. So peer groups are a great opportunity, right? Just because you feel there's something that you need help with doesn't mean there's not something else that you can help other people with, right? And I don't know everything. There's all kinds of stuff I don't know anything about. I learned a ton of things today from Cecilia's talk. It was wonderful. There were some debugging methods in there that I did not know about, and I've been doing Angular for years. There's always things you can learn, but there's always things you can offer as well. So don't ever hesitate to help somebody with one thing and then take help on something else.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. This is one. I think it's a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah.
not a lot of people are talking about this, but that's kind of why I want to ask you, because I know you're not going to shy away from it. And I just think you're the perfect person for this. But I'm curious how you take care of your mental health. Like, what are things that you do to, like, I think as a programmer, it's easy to kind of go down this hole sometimes, especially working remote. It can be
Yeah.
easy to just get so isolated and be on your own. And so I'm curious, are there things that you do to stay out of that hole, or if you find yourself in it, how do you get out? And just overall, how do you take care of your mental health?
The first thing we have to acknowledge is that there is an incredibly toxic component to this industry. And if you've ever been at a conference or been somewhere and seen the eat, sleep code, it's funny, it's cute, it's whatever, but it's also unbelievably toxic, right? There is this misguided idea that if you're a coder, you have to do it all the time, because you can, right? Because we sit behind our computers and there's this idea that, especially when you're working from home, that we still haven't outgrown that stereotype that we are sitting in somebody's basement pounding around away on the keyboard all the time. And the first thing we've got to acknowledge is that there are some toxic stereotypes in this industry that have absolutely no place, because they are both gatekeeping, right? They're keeping people that would like to have a healthy work life, they're keeping them out of the industry because they of this impression. And also, it's really hard on us. So my advice is always to rest, take breaks. Some of my most brilliant breakthroughs happen when I'm taking a walk or taking a shower or doing something, anything other than actually sitting at my computer working, right? When I am trying to problem solve, I spend a lot less time sitting in front of my computer than I do when I'm writing or coding. You got to take those brain breaks. Eat healthy, exercise, take vacations. For goodness sakes, take vacations. And if you don't have enough vacation time, negotiate for better or find another job. I mean, take those opportunities. We're in an industry where we have a little bit of leverage there. So by all means, I would rather have more time off than more money. Always. At this point, it's so important to take care of yourself and take breaks. I play video games. I have all kinds of hobbies and things that I do, but have a life outside of coding. I think that's the single most important thing. And then do it. Actually take the time away and do it. The best way to avoid the really big struggle is when you are in a situation where you are obligated to be on a rote call schedule because of supporting production applications. And it's really important that there be enough time between times you have to do that you can have downtime as well. Because I've been on call. I spent years of my career like 24/7 on call. And that's a miserable way to be. Don't do that.
Yeah. Okay. That was perfect advice. That's exactly why I asked you. So thank you. But let's turn over the time for your presentation,
Cool.
and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Well, I will try to get through this quickly. Let me share my screen. Hopefully you can all see the slides. Awesome. So we're going to talk about the beauty of Firebase hosting and ways that we can use this to host your Angular apps and other things. So I'm going to show this really quickly. Of course, you know my name, Michael Dowden, and I own a digital product agency, Andromeda Galactic Solutions. We are a Google Cloud partner, and over the last couple of years, we have been working on a number of different web clients for us and our clients. So we've done all these different web projects. Every single one of these has something in common. And the first is that they are web-based applications written in Angular, and two, they are built on Firebase by my team. So my Google Developer Expert category is Firebase, so I do a lot of work with Firebase. Another member of our team is actually a GDE in Angular. So we do a lot of this work together. Before I started using Firebase, I spent a lot of time on other web-facing technologies, including PHP and Java and a number of other things. But for many years, I even ran my own physical servers. because 20 years ago that you kind of had to do that a lot of times. Of course, this involved building hardware, installing systems and software, configuring hosting software such as Apache or Tomcat, or maybe PostgreSQL. And you spent all this time in the nuts and bolts. Yes, LAMP stack, all that. After that, I followed a path that many of you probably did as well by moving to cloud managed servers. This made a lot of things easier. There's no more hardware to manage, but there's still a lot of network and system administration. There's still a lot of fiddly bits to get this right, especially on the security side. And this is fine for a lot of teams, but I am a software guy more than a systems guy. I don't like doing the operations stuff so much. So this led me to looking for a serverless solution, and this is how I found Firebase Hosting. And Firebase Hosting is awesome because it is blazingly fast, it is secure by default, and it is incredibly simple to use. So what I want to show you is how easy it can be to get up and running with Firebase Hosting and some ways in which you can use it for your projects. So to get started, it's 2 lines. You initialize a new Firebase project using the command line, and then you deploy your project to Firebase Hosting. That's literally it. So I'm going to do a demo. I'm going to do the thing you should never do, which is do a live demo. In the interest of time, I've gone ahead and set up a brand new Angular project. I just ran ng-new, and as you can see, brand new right there, just ran it to set up a new project. So I'm in here. Now what I want to do is set up a Firebase project. So I have already installed Firebase. You can do this with a single command line. I think I have a slide for that here in just a minute. What we're going to do for this particular case, there's all kinds of things in Firebase, right? I've got real-time database, I've got Firestore. All I'm going to care about right now is hosting. I'm going to specifically, nope, not that one. Yes, okay, that one. I don't want to set up GitHub action deploys right now, although it's important to note that that is an option. So if you're familiar with GitHub pages, using the GitHub action deploys essentially allows you to automatically redeploy to Firebase when you commit to a GitHub repo, the same way GitHub pages works, except then you're on Firebase hosting, which personal opinion is a little bit nicer to work with than the GitHub pages hosting. So this is the only thing I want. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. This doesn't always work from the command line, so we're going to find out. Yeah, that's fine. Nope, it's gonna yell at me. All right, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you the CLI on this. So here's Firebase. I'm gonna add a new brand new project. This is, I'm gonna call this Angular Meetup. I'm gonna turn that off right now because I don't want to deal with the cleanup afterwards. And it's going to create a new project, and we're at console.firebase.google.com. All you need to set up a Firebase account is literally any Google account. You can go there and sign right in. So it's created a new project, Angular Meetup, and now that that's there, I can go back to my CLI, and I should be able to do this. All right, I want to go down and select hosting, hit enter. I'm going to use an existing project. This is Angular Meetup with a fancy number after it. What do I want to use it as the directory? So this is going to be an Angular project. So Angular typically builds to dist followed by the project name. And I've been consistent on my project naming, so it should be that. Single page, yeah, by all means, go ahead and use the URL rewrites. I do not want to set up builds with GitHub. Boom, that's it. Firebase setup is complete. Okay. So that is all there is to that. Now I can do my Angular build. Give that just a second, and then we will deploy this to Firebase. Yep. And now the deploy. And that is how fast it is. Yes, the Angular build is always going to be substantially slower than the actual deploy, which is super cool. It's amazing how fast it is. One interesting thing about the hosting deploy is that it is an atomic operation, which means they'll upload the files, they'll get everything ready, and then they will switch from the old website to the new website, the old hosting files to the new hosting files in a single operation, which means that your users shouldn't be impacted by the update. Now I can come out here to the console, go to the hosting, and we'll see that I have hosting here. And if I click on this, I have an Angular app up and running on a public URL. Done. See? That's how easy it is. But I'm not going to stop there. There's still a little bit more content to show you. One thing you may have noticed is that the default URL I published is a fairly reasonable one. It's the project name.web.app. If I'd picked a project name that was unique, it wouldn't have added even the random characters at the end. It also has HTTPS support immediately. So I've actually seen some startups build their minimum viable products on the web.app domain that Firebase provides automatically. Most of the time, though, you're going to want to configure your own custom domain. Firebase has a really nice web console we can use for creating a custom domain. So we're going to show you how to do that here really quickly. So let's make a small change. Actually, we're going to load the code really quickly. I have the code right here. Now we're going to make a little change to the code. Let me go into the app component. Get out of all that. All right. In the content, I'm going to give this a add a little message there. And then I'm going to show you a couple things really fast. Configure the custom domain. All right, let's go to the custom domain, which is here. I've got too many windows open. All right, so I need to add a custom domain. So we're going to do that. So I have a custom domain that I have already configured to be able to do this because the record here that I have to set up on my domain configuration has already been set up for this because it makes it really easy to do this demo. All you would normally need to do is open your domain setup and add this record here though. So it still says pending. So I don't know if it's going to work or not, but we're going to find out. It usually works. Yep, there it goes. Now we want to prove that this is my site and not some clone, but it did actually run and it is also on HTTPS already, just that fast. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, live DNS replication, the way they're able to get away with this is a couple things. First of all, I already had the A record set up on this domain, so we didn't have to wait for that propagation. Two, this domain record is hosted on Google's name servers, so it's a Google registrar domain. And three, the way Firebase does the domain level configuration, in particular SSL, is the SSL is done through wildcard. So if you have set up that A record in advance, there's no 24-hour wait. It's literally instantaneous. If you haven't done that, I find that it usually takes about an hour, maybe two, if you are on a Google name server. So it's unbelievable how fast this is if you're used to the old way of doing this, right? So that is one super cool thing about this. All right, so now that we're there, all right, I'm going to make an update. I've made this update, so I'm going to do a rebuild, right? I'm going to go ng run build. And as soon as that's done building, we're going to deploy that update again. Deploy it. Okay, now we're going to test this. I'm going to reload this domain. Come on, are you going to, really? There it goes. There it goes. It just took it a second. So they both updated. with that new message. So now I'm going to show you another little cool thing you can do in here. So if I reload the hosting console, you'll see that I have two versions, all right? The original version and then this new one that I just did. Well, what I can do is click on this and say rollback. Poof, instantly rolled back. Now if I come out here and reload, it gets rid of that new message because I've rolled back to the original version. It was just that fast. Now, do I want to go back to the other deploy again? I can do that again. Roll back. And now I have the message again. And it's in both places because these different domains, but it's the same website. That is how fast you can roll back. Again, remember what I said, it's a atomic operation. They literally maintain an archive of the exact file set, and you're just moving pointers, essentially, for the domain. So the ability to roll back instantaneous like that is super duper cool. All right, back to the presentation. So another thing you can do with Firebase hosting is deploy multiple channels to the site. So you think of a channel as a temporary preview of your site or application. And this can be used to deploy development builds, for example. And these are some of the commands that you can use. The first command will list the current channels. The next one will create a new named channel. And the third one will deploy to that channel. And so this isn't a comprehensive list, but is enough to get us started with what you can do with channels. So I'm going to come back in here really quickly. I'm going to revert to the original deploy again. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this message. Yep, this message is gone. It doesn't exist. But I want to, that's the latest version of the code that I wrote. So I want to go ahead and deploy that to a channel instead. So I'm going to need to make this window a little bit wider for you. There we go. So we're going to list the channels. What you're going to see is the live channel. And so this is the channel that always exists for my hosting. So now we're going to create a demo channel. Okay, the demo channel has been created, and now I'm going to deploy to the demo channel. So now that's just a warning on this auth. I'm going to list, and now we have a demo channel and a live channel. Okay, what does that look like out here in the console? When I reload the console, actually, let's go back to all the way back out. There it is. There I have preview channels now. So here's the main site, right? This still, I'm going to reload it. It's just the same. It hasn't changed. But I can come in here and I have the demo channel. So I can view that. It's going to launch it through this really weird URL. And it now has my change because this is the version that I pushed out to the channel. So the channel has this version and the main site still has this version, the older original version. So you can have as many channels as you want, and they automatically expire. So this one expires in a week, right? So I can produce as many things. And so if you have CI/CD, for example, you can automatically push branches to a channel for preview, so you can have your code out there to look at automatically as part of publishing code, for example. But it's in a preview channel that will automatically expire. There's no manual cleanup. It's a pretty cool thing you can do. All right, but let's keep going. Yes, A/B testing, beta testing, all kinds of things. Yes. Okay. Another thing you can do is have multiple sites deployed side by side within Firebase hosting. So there's a lot of reasons you might want to do this. You might have multiple related sites. So on Angular projects, for example, it's not uncommon for me to break out my Angular project into multiple sub-projects. So maybe I have an admin console specifically for administrators, and I have the main application. Maybe I have some a reporting application. And instead of all those being the same massive Angular project, which you can do through lazy loading and everything, and it's not so bad, you may also want to break that out into different individual deploys. So multiple sites is a way to do that. They're all side by side on the same, otherwise the same Firebase assets. They can share the same database. They share the same auth, for example. Yes. Yes. Okay, so in order to support multiple sites, you will need to add a target to your project inside the Firebase JSON configuration file. This name can be absolutely anything, but should be meaningful to you and your team. In this example, I have chosen Angular as the target, since I'm planning to use this target to configure the deployment of the Angular project we just created and compare it with a static site that I am also going to deploy as part of the demo. Okay, so we're gonna have two code repositories side by side deploying to the same Firebase project. So these are the commands you need to use to tie the target name we just configured to the Firebase site ID. Using the CLI, you can automate a wide range of deploys. So in this case, we're going to apply hosting as the Firebase feature. The name is going to be the target name of Angular, and then the ID is the hosting ID within the environment. And then we can clear using the clear, and then you can specify the project you're going to use from the CLI by doing this. So let's do another quick demo. Let's come out to, let's go ahead and have this up and running. And actually, I'm going to pull open the code really quickly. So if you look here, I actually have two projects side by side. This is the Angular project, and I also have a static project right here. You know, I'm afraid that oh, shoot, I forgot to update the image. I need to update that image. It's all right. This is the last time I gave this talk was at a different conference, and I usually update the image for the conference, but that's okay. We'll work with it. See, I told you live demos, they're hard. So we're going to open the Firebase JSON for the Angular project. Okay, Angular Firebase JSON. So this is the configuration that it gave us by default. Hosting configuration, the public code is going to be from this build location. We're going to ignore some of these files, and we've got rewrites turned on so that any unhandled URLs go through index.html, which allows us to defer to Angular routing. Okay, pretty basic. So what we're going to do is add a target. So this hosting configuration has the Angular target, and now we need to set that up on the command line. So I'm going to show you, I have a whole long laundry list of projects in here. Lots and lots of stuff. I'm already using the Angular Meetup project, so there's nothing really special for me to do there. What I will have to do, however, is add the site. So and oops, typo. There we go. I did that right. Okay. Try again. All right, that worked. Helps when you type it correctly. So now we're going to do a Firebase deploy. Requested entity was not found. Oh, right. Because I have to give it the fancy characters at the end. Are there GitHub hooks that run this for you? There are GitHub hooks available. All right. But I'm not using GitHub, so I'm not doing that right now. There we go. That worked this time. Now try the deploy again. Yeah, my command line sometimes has problems not showing what it's actually doing, which is kind of irritating. I think I have a bug in my bash configuration. So, all right, so now if I come back out to the CLI, here we go. When I load this, it's just going to look the same as it has been looking. So we just have this main site. I deployed again the current version, but because I did an update, the main There we go. The main application now has the latest version of the code with that. No big deal. But what we want to do is deploy the static site alongside it. So I'm going to go here into the static site. I do need to show you the static site. So the static site configuration here has target static. And I'm going to have to, I've got a Firebase RC, so that's old and wrong. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that Firebase RC file, and then we're going to start this from scratch. So I'm in the static file. There we go. I need to grab project display name. I need that. Firebase use, and then we're going to do hosting static this time because this is the static hosting, and we're going to give it a new site. In order to give it a new site, I have to first create one. So to create a new hosting site, I'm going to come out here to hosting and add another site down at the bottom. All right, we're going to call this Angular Static 2022. All right, that works. So this is where our static site is now going to go. So now I've applied the target static to that, and now I deploy. It's deployed. I can come out here and reload this. We now see that that is there. I can click view. It's going to show you that I had just deployed something and now give you the URL to this specific static site page. Right, so that's there, that's there, that's there. I have all these things side by side. When I click to my main hosting configuration, now of course you have these two different projects. They're deployed side by side. They all use the same resources. Awesome. All right, so we've looked at a lot of options for managing deployments and environments, but what about customizing the behavior of the hosting environment itself? So let's look at a few ways we can configure how Firebase serves the requests. First one, and I kind of showed you this earlier, is a single page rewrite. You're going to use this a lot for Angular projects because you want to redirect all unhandled URLs to your index.html file for Angular, which is going to allow you to use Angular routing for all those URLs. So you can use rewrites for single page applications, progressive web applications, Angular. You can also use these for internationalization based upon language and country codes from the browser. So if you look through the Firebase documentation, they'll show you how you can set up different targets based upon language and country codes. Another type of rewrite is a function rewrite. This configuration allows you to map a specific URL pattern to be managed by a Firebase Cloud function. The Firebase Cloud function is similar to like a Lambda on AWS, or I guess they're still called functions in Azure. It's a small bit of code that runs in a serverless fashion, is deployed in a serverless fashion. And so this allows you to map those functions to your URL in a way that makes sense to your application with no additional configuration. So this is the way you would do that here. You can also remap URLs through redirects, which is a normal thing you want to be able to do a lot of times, especially if you've just redone your website and you want to maintain all the existing traffic. You can do 301s or 302s. You can specify source and destination. And what's interesting is the redirects can be both local, which in this case it's from a specific path to a specific different path, or it can be to a full URL starting with https:// etc. You can also choose whether or not you want to pass along the additional details on the URL or just do a clean redirect. Another thing you need to be able to do, and this is really, really, really critical, you've got to be able to have header support. So Firebase JSON allows you to specify headers. So for example, you can set far future cache control headers on images, which is what I'm showing here. You can also set security headers. So as an example, here I've got a single source, which is **. That means all requests anywhere to my site are going to receive these headers, and then I've got a list of headers. Just as an example, XSS protection header, X-frame options header, any other security headers you need to be able to do, you can put in here. So all that configuration is great, but testing is also important. So you can always use channels for testing, but it's important to be able to test on your local machine. So this one command is all it takes to run a fully configured local Firebase server for development and testing. And so let's take a quick peek at the configuration files behind the scenes. And then I'm going to show you a bit of a demo on that as well. So again, the Firebase JSON here, we've got some ignores, we've got our target. This is where the builds come from and our rewrites to the Angular project. If I instead move into the static configuration, I've got a little bit more detail here. So I've got a redirect. So anything to /console will do a hard redirect to the Firebase Cloud Console. So that's interesting. I have my far future header on my images, and I have a bunch of security headers set here. So what's going to happen is that I'm in the static project right now, and I'm going to run Firebase Serve. So it's going to load on localhost :5000. Awesome. So let's go out there and open this up. There we go. Whoops, that's wrong. That went to my website. I know why. I know why. So what I'm going to do is open a private browsing window because I don't want to deal with caches, and try this again. The problem is I mistakenly did a hard redirect once on localhost 5000, and that caused this problem. So I'm running the static site, no big deal. We're used to being able to do that, but in this case, it's using the full configuration. That means that if I type console here, it's going to, instead of loading anything, it's going to issue a redirect. And now it's doing the redirect to the Firebase Cloud Console. Now it's going to ask me to sign on to Google because I'm in an incognito window in order to get it to work. But the point is that that redirect happened. So it's not just that it's running the code, it's running the code with all of this configuration. And in fact, I can prove it again really quickly by opening up the network tab and showing you the details here. So if I, whoops, reload this, it's really, oh, I see, I need all. There we go, localhost. And I see the response headers include all my different headers, right, that I had set. So even those headers that I set as part of my Firebase configuration, those are running on localhost as well. And it's all it takes, just like one line of code, right? So all of these things that I'm showing you are really, really simple and easy to do. So as much as Firebase hosting is, quote, only for static files, this does not mean you cannot deploy fully featured applications, of course. This includes both your Angular single page and progressive web applications. You can also include backend APIs using cloud functions. It's free up to 10 gigabytes. That is both 10 gigabytes of storage plus 360 megabytes a day, which works out to 10 gigabytes a month. Up to that level of traffic, totally free. Firebase Cloud Hosting is among the fastest on the planet. It is fast globally. It compares very favorably to services like CloudFront, GitHub Pages, and Netlify. And there's a lot of configuration options available without adding complexity to the tool. And depending on who you ask, I've seen some statistics that it is in fact the fastest on the planet, but that may depend on a number of factors. But it's really fantastic. If you want to learn more about Firebase hosting, here are some resources on their docs pages that I found super useful as I was learning how to do different interesting configuration things. And that's it. That's me. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Hopefully you found this really interesting, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I think everybody's like Jason's over there clapping. Everybody's agreeing with that. That was really cool to watch. But yeah, there are about 5 questions, so let's get into those. Reynold is wondering, can you explain what atomic updating is exactly?
Sure. So anytime you hear the word atomic in a kind of a DevOps scenario, what it means is that it is a single operation. So it's a single point of failure. In this particular case, what it means is that all of the work of loading the new data, the new content for your site, takes as long as it takes, and it happens when it happens. But as soon as it's all loaded, Firebase then switches the pointer, essentially what code gets loaded when somebody types in your domain. It moves the pointer from the old to the new, and that is a single operation. It means it happens instantaneously with zero lag and zero downtime. So I've been running production applications on Firebase for a number of years, and I have never had downtime as part of a release in years, because part of that depends on you having carefully staging your data, if you have data changes or data updates or whatever. But if you have taken care of that part of it, the code updates just happen. They happen super fast, no issues.
Nice. All right. Marcus is wondering, can we disable the old domain and only use the added domain?
Great question. I don't believe so, but that the primary domain that they provide for you, yeah. So I can delete or edit the custom domains, but I can't change these. And there's a few reasons for that they do that, because Google is providing services behind the scenes based upon these domains, in particular this firebaseapp.com domain. That is actually tied into the security model between Firebase and Google Cloud Console. And they are, if I go into this just a little bit more, if I go to the project settings, they're creating service accounts on this domain that will be able to do things for you. And it's also tied into authentication. So if you add authentication to your application, authentication by default happens on that core domain. You can change authentication to work on your new custom domain from the user's perspective, but my understanding is that they really need those in order to run the service. You don't have to use those anywhere. You don't have to publicize them. They will not show up on Google search results unless I think you might be able to force them to if you were to submit them, but you probably don't want to do that. You want to set up your custom domain and do all your SEO on your custom domain. And then you won't have a problem because nobody will ever access those. The other thing you can, of course, do is potentially do a redirect. If you find that somebody came to the site using the wrong domain or the domain you don't want them to use, you could do a forced redirect to your new custom domain. That would work as well.
I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, but I think it's Quessy is hoping you can go back a couple of slides on your slide deck.
Yes, I can. Where am I going?
I'm not sure. I don't know if you'll have to help us, Quessy. You'll have to tell us in the chat. Do you want him to go forward one now? I'm thinking it's either this one or the one after it or both. I don't know. So hopefully.
For the further research slide?
It might be that one, yeah. But
yeah, totally.
Okay. All right. What about the back-end features of Firebase, like database, etc.?
Okay, so I use all the services. I'm really a big fan of Firebase as a general rule. So I use both real-time database and Cloud Firestore. I use auth. The auth service is fantastic. You can add authentication to your applications in 15 minutes or less by using Firebase authentication. So if you've ever dealt with OAuth implementations, for example, I can add Google logins, Firebase login, Google logins, Facebook logins, Twitter logins, email and password logins, all of that in about 15 to 20 minutes to an application. So I love the service for that. There's a lot of other great utilities that are fully integrated with Google Analytics now for both web apps and mobile apps. So if you're deploying mobile apps and you want to get the same level of analytics that you would expect from Google Analytics, you can get that, and you can get that across the board. So let's say you have a web app, an Angular app, or sorry, web app, an Android app, and an iOS app, all deployed separately to those different environments. You can get combined analytics across the board on those through Firebase.
Cool. Okay. What is support like if things go wrong?
It depends on the nature of what's going wrong. So to be clear, I think that in the, 5 years I've been working with Firebase in production, I think that I have had maybe a couple hours of downtime, far less downtime than any other provider that I'm aware of. So from that standpoint, you're not likely to have an issue. If there is really an issue with their service, there is a support request. If it is an emergency, they will get back to you pretty promptly. But this is still Google. So unless you are a large enterprise, you are unlikely to have an 800 number real-time support for anything necessarily. I have never needed it, fortunately. It doesn't mean you won't. The Firebase team is really, really good at providing support. Places like Stack Overflow and other, most of the things you're going to run into are going to be coding questions. It's going to be integration questions. It's going to be, I'm not sure how to accomplish this thing. And they really have a great team. They also have a lot of different tools they provide. So for example, they build the core JavaScript SDK, but they also have an Angular specific SDK called Angular Fire that you can use. Yeah, Craig, you're totally right. You're going to run into configuration issues. You're not going to run into runtime issues. I never have. The Google infrastructure has been rock solid from my perspective.
Nice. Cool. Okay, last one. Are there unlimited rollbacks?
Yes. Like there's no particular limit. Like how far back can you go? Actually, I'm not going to do this live, but let me look up something really quickly because I can probably answer that question. So I'm going to pop open this console and I'm going to go to one of our apps that has been up and running forever, for multiple years. I'm going to look at a whole bunch of things. So I'm going to, here, I'll show you this now that I've got it loaded. I am just going to go through.
Test it in prod.
I'm not going to click that because that would be really, really bad, but that goes all the way back to January 2nd, 2017. Yeah, that's probably our first release. Sounds about right. So all the way to the end of time. I'm going to close that now. I don't want to click anything.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you, both of you, for your presentations. I feel like we learned a ton of really valuable information. Definitely some cool new tools to go play around with.